Well, do we have a Rayleigh update? What's that? I'm feeling fine. I always look a little palish. Look even worse than normal, yeah. No, they stayed home. Still coughing and snotting and everything else. But the kids are fighting, so I know they're okay. They're fine, yeah. Yep. That's when you know they're getting better. Well, tonight we are looking at, first we're going to look at Barabbas. And be totally honest with you, there's not a whole lot to say about Barabbas. He has a lasting legacy, mainly because he was the one chosen by the Jews to be released instead of Jesus. He was a prisoner at the time of Jesus' trial or mock trial. One interesting thing about Barabbas is how the picture just develops and develops depending on which gospel record you're looking at. So, if you look at Matthew, you'll learn that he was a notorious prisoner, which, you know, a prisoner would be kind of common sense because obviously he was called up from the prison or whatever. But Matthew calls him a notorious prisoner, very well known. John says that he was a robber, and it's kind of an interesting word there that I'm going to make a note of in just a second. Mark and Luke give us probably the most significant details about, just to give us an idea, that he was a rebel and that he was convicted of insurrection, which is basically rebellion. It's a fancy term for an attempted revolt of the government, and murder. So, whereas Matthew and John may leave us with a false impression, not false, it's probably the wrong word, but an incomplete impression of this man Barabbas, Mark and Luke's accounts that pretty much say the same thing really gives us a different idea, puts this man into perspective. And it makes the choice that the Jews made just that much worse. And extremely ironic, by the way. So the word robber, it is a person, obviously one depriving another of his property openly and by violence. But there's another word that can sometimes be translated robber or translated by a similar term, thief. And there's a difference between the two. The other word that's translated thief is somebody who does their work secretly, like a pickpocket. You never know, or they break in secretly, take something. They don't do it. They don't hurt anybody. You know, they don't want to be found, seen, and caught. That's one word that's translated thief. This word, translated robber, is somebody. Violence is the main characteristic of this person. What John says Barabbas was, violence, not stealth, but violence. Judas Iscariot was a thief, according to John in John 12:6. He didn't do violence to anybody, but we are told that he was skimming money out of the money box that Jesus put him in charge of. he stole secretly. Barabbas was a robber, somebody who did violence, violent acts of, robbery, I guess, hurting people. Jesus, if you remember, he referred to the temple as a den of robbers. And that's kind of telling, considering what that word usually entails. Think about the zealots who were waiting for a Messiah to come, especially, more than the other Jews even, for turning around the Roman government. We're going to fire up this revolt, this movement, where, like the Judges period, which we're going to look at in just a second, they were characterized by these acts of violence and rebellion. Well, apparently Barabbas, that is a similar kind of thing to what he was a part of, whether it was religious or supposedly religious, misplaced patriotism. This is what Barabbas was in prison for. Insurrection and murder. He killed at least one person in this revolt. So that's who Barabbas was. And how powerful is that in a negative way about the fact that the Jews, Pilate very cleverly selected this man. If you remember, he said, you have a custom every year, I'll release anybody that you name. Now, I've always thought that, I always took that to mean and assumed that every single year he gave them a choice, like he did on this occasion. But the more I've thought about it, the more I'm not so sure if that's the case. They may have just requested anybody. We want this prisoner to be released. Here's his name. And Pilate would do it. But on this occasion, he took advantage of the situation, and he was already hesitant to do anything to Jesus because he was innocent. So he very cleverly selected this man, because it's like, now this is my perfect way out. I don't have to worry about convicting this innocent man, because here's the alternative option, Barabbas. This murderer, robber, rebel, notorious. Who do you want me to release? And they said, Barabbas. That's what is so incredible about that decision. And the irony is, the main thing that they were charging Jesus of was insurrection, or potential insurrection. And here they had a man who was already convicted of insurrection, and yet they asked for him to be released. They released the man who's actually committed insurrection, and not the man who we claim might someday commit insurrection. Just absolutely mind-boggling, but prophesied through and through, every step of the way. But just think about how we don't really know if this man's life changed. I don't really see anything that would indicate any change whatsoever. But I can't imagine a person that has any humanity left in them not remembering that day. And Jesus, who was innocent and yet who was really died in his place. He died in everybody's place, spiritually speaking, but he died in his place literally. Because ultimately, that's exactly what happened. Their choice of Barabbas just led to his scourging, technically. And then Pilate gave it one more shot, but ultimately, he was crucified whenever Barabbas was the one that deserved to die. That's about all that can be said about Barabbas, because there's nothing else. Did he repent? Did he stop being the kind of man he was? We don't know. But what we do know is that Jesus died in his place. And that is a picture of divine grace. I get the impression the writer of the book here assumed that Barabbas was moved by this. Didn't give any references, but he seemed to think so. Certainly would be moving if he did. But we're not given that detail. Yes, sir.
We do have histories of, like people like that did change.
Mm-hmm.
Like the people on the
Yeah.
supposed to be, and we know Paul uses another. So we know that people can change.
Yeah.
Whether he did, like I said, the scripture is not clear on it. So I guess whatever somebody would want to believe that he did change.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like I think Dahmer.
Yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, after all that the crime that he did, he changed.
Yeah.
He was in prison. So,
Yep.
okay. I mean, like I say, so there's
It's possible.
possible that people do change, because we know that, of course, it's told too that there's a time and a place where, say, like the point of no return, that some people, no matter what, they're not going to return.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that it says not to cast a pearl before swine. So, I mean, there is a time, some people just not going to change.
Yeah.
But we know that through God's patience, there's some people that, you would think they would never change, they do.
Yep, absolutely. And he could have been one of them.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know how much he knew Jesus. He may never even heard of Jesus. And he probably didn't learn much about him on this occasion. But I can't imagine there not being something that at least crossed his mind about the whole situation, the odds of them choosing him. That alone should have got his attention, like, what has just happened? I mean, just crazy to think about. But Jesus willingly died not only for him, he died for all of us. Any other thoughts or comments or questions on Barabbas, the man who had a substitute?
Staff at my house sees a lot of change in me with my attitude and stuff like that.
That's great.
And I'm trying to do better and praying to Jesus all the time.
Mm-hmm.
For some forgiveness to please let me come when I die. Can you take me to heaven?
Yeah.
Best I can.
That's great. That's all we can do is the best we can, and any change that we can make in the right direction is a worthy effort. So you can be an encouragement to us to try to do the same thing. People notice it when we change, and it'll affect them. Really.
I've been in the hospital for 2 years after the last one when I went to Waukegan, and
Mm-hmm.
that they changed it.
Well, I bet people have noticed, like you said.
Yeah.
So good for you. Well, our other character, two characters, Barak, and no offense to Barak, but most of our talk about Barak is not going to be about Barak. It's going to be about Deborah. Now, why would it be about Deborah? Well, because Deborah goes with Barak in the Scriptures. Barak was a soldier, really a warrior, I guess, whom Deborah chose to lead this military campaign, which resulted in the defeat of Sisera, the leader of the Canaanites. Deborah was one of the judges, or at least is listed and mentioned among them. She was a prophetess and a judge in Israel. Judges 4 and 5 are the chapters where their ministries are found. Barak, his name means lightning or possibly thunder. Deborah means bee with 2 E's, like buzzy, buzzy bee. Way up there, northernmost among all the judges. Deborah with her sidekick, I guess, Barak. And I just realized it says Balak on the paper in one place, Barak on one place, Balak. We already talked about Balak. We're not looking at Balak, so just ignore that. It's Barak. Similar? But Deborah, it's interesting that as we talked about the judges were military leaders. That's who the judges were in the judges period. They were primarily military leaders that led these campaigns to deliver the nation of Israel from their oppressors. So we might look at this and, Barak really fits that description more than Deborah does, but Deborah's the one who was said to have judged the land. So that may indicate that there was more to this role of a judge than just the physical military aspect of it. But in the deliverance of Israel, Deborah she's the one that's placed first and emphasized, not Barak. And the writer points out how, women of history, there's occasionally throughout history, there would be a strong-minded and unique woman who breaks upon human history, it says. By her exploits leaves the impact of her personality upon events and secures for herself an imperishable honor. He mentioned at least one woman I've never heard of. Joan of Arc was another one, closer to us at least. Women like Amelia Earhart. Most people know that name. Rosa Parks and other people like that. Well, Deborah she apparently was a very gifted woman, spiritually, mentally, very capable, and she is a very large figure and encouraging and inspirational woman in the Old Testament. She occupied several positions, and that's how we're going to look at her tonight in this. Not the least of which, although we may think it is, based on all that she did, was her role as a wife. She is said to be, first of all, a prophetess. We'll look at that next. But the wife of this man, and that's all it says about it. So it just mentions her as a wife. Well, if we look at it, going backwards and learn a little bit about Deborah and read what she did in Judges 4 and 5, and then you go back, you may make a false assumption, like some have done, possibly false, that a woman like Deborah is going to be, she's going to be the one that wears the pants in her marriage, if you know what I mean. I don't know if that's fair, to be honest, to assume that. Yes, she was a powerful woman. She was strong-minded. But I don't think it is a correct assumption to assume that her husband was some pushover that just let her run the show, so to speak, in their own home. I think it's a much better picture of her, and him for that matter, that was not the case, but that he may have been not quite as forthcoming as she was. This is kind of how we looked at Aquila and Priscilla, if you remember, because Priscilla is often mentioned first in that. There you go. I didn't see you sitting there. Well, I don't think her husband was probably as, whatever you want to call it, as she was. But I don't think it's too far-fetched to believe that he was encouraging to her. He was maybe more silently or quietly behind her, and behind the scenes was probably just as faithful and righteous, for lack of a better word, as she was. And he points out, the writer of the book says, many of the notable men of the world have testified to the succor and inspiration they received from their wives, who walked with them in full agreement as they climbed the heights. Maybe it was the other way around for Deborah and her husband. And I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that she would have never become the woman and figure she was if it hadn't been for her husband. Behind her, beside her, going along with her. So she was a wife, first of all, and that has a lot of implications, and all good ones, I may say. She was a prophetess. Now this is the unique thing, one of the unique things about her, because she's the only judge that's described like this. Man or woman, prophet or prophetess, none of the other judges are described like this. If we include Samuel as one of the actual judges, then he would definitely sort of fall in that category of being a prophet and a judge. But she was not very many women, to my memory, are referred to as prophetesses in the Bible. But Deborah's one of them. Miriam would fall into that category, I believe, and another woman in 2 Kings 22:14. So the picture we have of Deborah, who, by the way, is Deborah number 2. We haven't even looked at Deborah number 1, but this is Deborah number 2. Deborah number 1's in the book of Genesis, but just if you're wondering why it says number 2. Deborah, the picture is, she used to sit, this is chapter 4, verse 5, Judges 4:5. She used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. So there's the picture of this whole period when she was a leading figure in the nation. There was this palm tree that was conspicuous, apparently because they were rare at that time in that area, and it would later become known as Deborah's palm tree, basically. She would sit there, her house may have been right there, and the people would come to her. Why would they come to her? Well, according to this verse, for judgment. But being a prophetess, what else do you think they may have come to her for? Yeah, God's Word. That's what a prophet does. And prophetess is just a feminine form of the word prophet. So they would have come to her for maybe all sorts of God-centered things like advice and counsel and revelation, and probably judgment in the term, the way we would normally use that. Probably had disputes. Who better than a godly person to help you settle a dispute?
Usually God chose her.
Yeah.
Just like all the prophets, God chose those prophets.
Uh-huh.
He chose her too.
Yeah, I don't think she just came up with this on her own, you know. She didn't just have this gift, you know, that she could perceive the mind of God or anything like that. I'm sure God chose her just the way He chose Samuel and Moses and all the other prophets. So she was appointed, given this ability, this gift, if you will, and it qualified her to judge the nation. Or God gave it to her to judge the nation, perhaps. Prophets were the media between God and men, a medium, go-between, middleman. And that's what Deborah was. She was also an agitator, but in a good way. I don't know if we even use that in a good way, but he is, in the sense of stirring up people. Some people are good at stirring up other people. Sadly, a lot of times people are stirred up for bad things. Probably more often than not, to be honest. unfortunately. But Deborah was very effective at stirring people up. She was inspiring. She was influential, powerful. It makes you wonder, what was it about this woman that was so outstanding and influential in this way, powerful, and we don't know what it was. Don't know if she was physically beautiful. We don't know anything. But we know that she was a powerful, powerful woman, and a godly woman, a righteous woman, not powerful in her own right and doing whatever she wanted, exercising her will over people, but she was a powerful, God-fearing, godly woman whose number one focus and emphasis was always pleasing God. And at this time, at this point in history, there were oppressors over the nation, the Canaanites. She aroused the nation from its spiritual slumber, which is why the oppression was happening. Their spirits were broken. They were afraid. They were dejected. All hope was lost. But she roused the people spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and her example really was a very important thing for the people at this time. Maybe one of the things that says something about Deborah's influence and power more than anything else was her relationship with this man Barak, who was clearly already a soldier, a warrior. And it says she sent and summoned him to be a leader in this military effort to go fight the Canaanites. And he listened, first of all. He listened. She was not a queen. She was not a monarch. But he heard her. He was skeptical. But he did hear. She said, "Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, and taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, I'll draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops. I'll give him into your hand." She's saying, did not the Lord say that? Barak says, "I'll go if you'll go with me. But if you will not go with me, I ain't going." Again, I think that says something about Deborah. Why do you think he would want her to go? And I'll emphasize, why do you think? Because there's really no correct answer.
You would assume because he knew that God was with her.
Okay, that would be a big part of it, the biggest part. If he, which he obviously does, understands that she does have a connection with Jehovah. I would want that person with me, even if no matter what I was going to do, but especially if I'm going to do something like this. And since she brought him into it, Jehovah that is, into it, in her message to him, it's probably a wise thing for him to say, I want you to come too. Could have been just because of the power of her influence and encouragement, support. Whatever it was a deal breaker. Either you come or I'm not going. I want you with me. Whatever that may have meant to him, that was his one condition. Didn't ask for a sign, didn't ask for, didn't really even express any doubt. He just said, one condition, you come with me, and it's done. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you're going will not lead to your glory, for Jehovah will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. If there's one thing that most warriors want, what do you think it might be? Glory. For glory. Even if we die, we'll die on the battlefield in honor with our sword in our hands, and that's glory. She goes ahead and tells him, by the way, you're not going to receive glory for this. Jehovah is going to, you're not going to get the big kill on the general. God's given that to a woman, is what she says. He probably assumed it meant her, but that wouldn't be the way it played out. So they went. They succeeded and totally defeated the Canaanites there. She was also a ruler, the fourth or fifth of the judges that were raised up by God to deliver His people. She was instant both in word and deed at a time when people were doing whatever was right in their own eyes. He includes that she was a warrior. Now, I may have just overlooked it. And if I did, and somebody notices it, then please point it out, help me out here. I've never noticed a place that explicitly says that Deborah fought the way Barak fought, and the way David fought, and the way Jonathan fought, and Saul and all the other warriors and mighty men that we read about. And if I'm mistaken in that, then I'm so sorry, Deborah. I didn't mean to discredit you like that. Yeah, just the fact that she went with him.
She was associated, like, we soldiers, we associate other people that are with them, as being soldiers.
Yeah, did she go with him?
I know, I think there was a movie made, a few years back about, there was a conscious objector, when it was in the war, and he saved so many lives. I can't remember the name of that movie. And it seems like over 100 or more people, but he kept going back here, and, but though, like I say, he didn't use a gun or anything.
Yeah, I know which movie you're talking about.
So, I mean,
I could have told you the name of it if you hadn't said it. If you hadn't, Hacksaw Ridge.
yeah, I
yeah.
guess that was, Hacksaw.
Yep. So she may have, did she go with him? Let's see, where she says go to Mount Tabor. Now, when it says she went with him, I mean, it could mean that she just went with him to the place where the fighting would end up being, or did she go with him to the fighting itself? I can't imagine that. I mean, I find that a little hard to, since the other option is just as reasonable. That makes more sense to me, given who she was and her position and everything. But she may have fought. I mean, she could have. And more power to her if she did. But
The text doesn't say anything about God commanding her to go.
yeah, I think she went for him because that was his condition. She needed him, which is a big compliment to him. I'm sure there were all kinds of warriors in Israel. She called him, you, Barak, and that fact alone speaks more highly of Barak probably than anything else in the whole account, that he is the one that she called upon to be the leader in this effort. So maybe she fought, even if she didn't fight with a sword, she was still a warrior, I think, just not with sword and shield. Just like Paul said, we're fighting a war, but our weapons aren't carnal. Deborah was fighting a war, and her war was way more important than the one fought on the actual physical battlefield. But they went hand in hand at this time in their history. So in that fighting, by the way, the odds were totally against them. 10,000 men, she said. Don't know if that were all the men they had. That was the men that she told him to bring. But it seems to indicate that was them. That was the whole gang. Sisera commanded about 100,000 men, and they had 900 iron chariots. Not good odds at all, but they won, and they did not back down. Deborah, Barak, the 10,000 men, because she had God as her ally. She had God on her side, and she knew, like Jonathan, like David, when you have Jehovah on your side, you win. And you don't need to fear. You don't need to be afraid. You don't need to worry. You don't need to doubt your own strength because it's God's strength. So Sisera escapes, and he winds up in the tent of a woman named Jael. As we pointed out, the book of Judges is pretty dark and grim, and this is no exception. He winds up in her tent. He goes to sleep. Jael takes a hammer and a tent peg, goes ahead and pegs him into the ground through his temple. And there goes Sisera. So it's another providential situation here, just like with Jehoshaphat and Ahab, when Ahab was all disguised and wearing the armor and everything, and then just when he's going to get away, here comes an arrow, mortally wounds him, kills him. God won. Here, Sisera escaped, winds up in the tent of this woman. What's this woman going to do to the general of the army? Well, I'll tell you one thing she's going to do is put a tent peg through his head. And that's how God killed him. And that's what Deborah said all along. Jehovah's going to give the glory to a woman, or going to sell Sisera into the hand of a woman, and she'll get the glory, not you. And there it is. It wasn't Deborah that did it, it was this woman, Jael. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. So she was also a poetess, because chapter 4 is the account of their ministry. Chapter 5 is their song and celebration of the ministry and deliverance. The song of Deborah and Barak, which starts, "Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on that day," and then the whole rest of this is that song. It has been said to be one of the most magnificent and beautiful pieces of Hebrew poetry ever written, ever recorded. The writer points out, as it was once said of Julius Caesar, that he should say he wrote with the same ability with which he fought. Thanks, autocorrect there. But sounds like it could be said of Deborah as well. She was as good with a pen as she was with anything else. In her prophecy, in her ruling, in her being in her home, judging. She was also a poet, praising God, extolling God for His great deliverance, giving Him the glory. Not herself, but God. So he says, her song is immortal because her life was dedicated to God and her deeds heroic and sublime, which we're going to see in just a second in the next little part, which is the final thing. a mother. And it's in quotation marks because we don't have any indication she was literally a mother, that she ever had children. But she was like a mother. To whom was she like a mother? Chapter 5, verse 7. Somebody said something, but I spoke over them, so I didn't hear it. Okay, in Israel. Arose as a mother in Israel. The implication, I think, is to Israel, all Israel. She was as a mother. I don't know why if she didn't have children, I don't know why. She was pretty busy. That may be one reason why. But she was as a mother. Writer points out that another writer said about Jesus, Jesus had no children, that he might adopt all children. Well, Deborah, that could be said of her also. And the source of that motherhood was her piety. Above all her remarkable gifts was her trust in God, ever the source of any woman's highest adornment. Reminds me of Proverbs 31, the woman who fears Jehovah, and 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10. Hers was a brilliant career because of a heart that was fixed on God. She's immortal because she served God to the limit of her ability and capacity. Called upon by God, clearly. Answered that call, fulfilled that call, and to the fullest extent, because she was God's woman. So whatever God would want of her, she did. And I think that also, her character in that way has implications about her role as a wife as well. Thoughts, comments? Sorry, Barak, that we spent all the time talking about Deborah, but he just answered her call. That's what he did, so that's all we can say about him. Although the fact that he went, again, says as much about him as it does her. She's a great example for men and women, for that matter. You don't have to be a dejected, victim to be a godly woman. You can be powerful, influential, strong. Deborah was. And there are several other women we read in the Scriptures that were the same. Yeah.
You noted on page 1, he is mentioned in the Hall of Faith.
Yep. Yep, Barak landed that. So I'm of the opinion that if your name's in Hebrews 11, that is the strongest commentary and compliment that anybody could have about them, is that. Just your name being there says more about you than anything else could possibly say. Even though it's just his name. It's in the verse where he says, time would fail me if we talked about Gideon and Barak, so it doesn't even talk about him, it just mentions him. But yeah, he landed that. And that is a very, very high praise for him. A warrior of God. Any other thoughts or comments? I'll switch that off.